The execution is what matters, right? Ideas are a dime a dozen, the execution are what matters. Sperm is actually much less valuable than a dime a dozen, right? So when you think about it, like, who's in charge? Is it the person? I'm just saying, it's quite affordable.
Peter Saddington, your big game hunter. And guys, we have our sights on someone special today.
Only a mother could invest in this idea.
Made this like super artistic.
That is actually absolutely correct. And that's a very, very astute assessment, actually.
True startup story, guys. You got it. Your company just got seed round financed. Congratulations. You're going to the moon. But now you have to scale. You found great talent out in California, New York, Georgia, and even Eastern Europe. So what communications platform will you be using to ensure your international team is always aligned? Well, the answer is easy. Slack.com for Teams. We've used Slack for all of our previous startups, and they've supported us in tremendous ways. And we want to give them a thanks today for supporting vchunting.com. Did you also know that Slack is a great tool for personal use? Yeah, I use my own personal Slack channel to drop in documents, notes, to-dos, and follow-ups to ensure that my workflow throughout the day is right on course. I promise you, if you try out slack.com for personal use, you'll end up using it for your team as well. Go to slack.com to check it out. Welcome everybody to season 3 of VC Hunting with me, Peter Saddington. You guys know we are on the hunt for untold stories of venture capitalists, and I have a great one in our sights today. It's Sara KUNST, the managing director of CLEO Capital, a relatively new venture firm, and a Marie Claire contributing editor, and she's all over the web. Thanks so much, Sara, for joining the show.
Thank you.
So let's just jump right in. You have a really intriguing background with some pretty big players, if I may say. Michigan State University, spent some time over at Apple, Red Bull, Chanel, one of my wife's favorite places to shop. And then you cut your teeth at Sequoia Capital as a scout. So give us the skinny a little bit here, Sara. How did you get into venture capital, and what has kept you here?
Yeah. So, I started my career out of college, like you said, at some really big companies, very much corporate. But I was always interested in innovation and technology. I ended up at a startup. And when that startup was running out of money, I was running around asking investors that I knew, saying, hey, what do we do? And finally, one of them said, your company's definitely going to fail, but you seem smart. Would you like to be an investor? And I said, well, yeah, I need a job. And that's how I ended up with my first job in investing at Moore Davidow Ventures, which was at the time a $1.7 billion Sand Hill Road venture capital fund in Silicon Valley, and did that as an analyst and sort of got into the world and liked it and really enjoyed helping companies and the sort of outward facing piece of venture. And then after that, I started a company in the sports media space, ran that for almost 3 years. While I was running that, Sequoia asked me to be a scout. So basically, I was angel investing with their money. And then after that, I was thinking about what to do next as my company was running out of money and I was shutting it down. And, I'd had experience on the limited partner side at Michigan State University, where I was on a board that made investments into venture funds. I'd been an investor. I'd been an advisor to a lot of venture funds. I helped Bumble, the dating app, launch their corporate VC arm. So I just had a really wide range of experiences. And I decided that for the next thing I wanted to do, I wanted to start my own fund because I saw some interesting holes in the market that I thought I could fill.
Awesome. Well, that's a perfect leading question of sorts. So what holes did you see in the venture capital world, and what uniquely could you bring to fill in those holes? Yeah.
So I would say there were 2 main holes that my fund aims to fill, and I think we're doing a pretty good job at it. One is scout investing, which scout investing is a very sort of Silicon Valley insider thing, so I'll explain it briefly. But scout investing basically means that someone else is funding your angel investing, right? So about 10, 12 years ago, Sequoia and other big funds realized that they weren't going to see every deal before it launched anymore, because it didn't take millions of dollars to launch a website anymore. Anybody could do it from their dorm room, right? So they started giving money to people in their network who were generally up and coming executives or founders who weren't personally liquid, meaning they didn't have the personal cash to angel invest, but they had the networks. And so scout investing basically means that you are angel investing on somebody else's dime. And so Sequoia had asked me to be part of their program. It was a great program. They have about 100 scouts at any given time. There are probably another 100 scouts scattered throughout another handful of big venture funds in the Valley. But what I quickly found out is that functionally, one, all of them were in Silicon Valley. Two, they were probably 90% male. And I knew a ton of amazing female founders in my networks all over the country who I thought would really be very, very, very high value adds as angel investors. So when I started thinking about my fund, I knew that from the beginning I wanted to build the scout element of it. And I decided, to also focus primarily on female scouts. And so I have around 10 at any given time, amazing scouts from all over the country who are all female founders. And they invest in whatever they want. We don't have a gender lens or a diversity lens within the fund, but they all happen to be awesome women. And then the other hole that I saw is there are a lot of funds that theoretically, possibly, occasionally will write you a pre-seed check. Right. It is very hard to find a venture fund that is excited about investing in pre-seed. There are a couple that do it, A4, Precursor, but really, given the amount of capital in later stages of venture, I felt like there was a gap in the market for pre-seed. And so the other thing that I do with my direct investing, so the scouts are investing at incredibly early levels, and the place that I focus on in my direct investing really is the pre-seed area.
Awesome. And so do you have a distinctive thesis or area, or do you really give autonomy and the ability to choose their own investments of sorts to all of your scouts? Or do you have an undercurrent or underlying theme of kind of maybe even a framework to say, these are kind of what we're looking for? Tell me.
No. So, you know how you have a boss who's a micromanager and you really like them in theory, but you actually hate them because you just did anything.
You sound like you're speaking from experience.
Oh, Nicole was so lovely, but yes.
Nicole!
It was a very, very, very long time ago and it wasn't even in tech, but yes, but no, I don't want to be a micromanager. I think that the worst thing I can do with my time, and I think the worst thing I can do with the Scout program, is try to guess, try to assume that I know more about the areas they're passionate about than they do, right? And I'm a very smart person. I can't be smarter than, 10 to 12 of the smartest founders in my network about everything all the time. Even if I was at that point, why have a Scout program, right? So They have a ton of autonomy. They invest in things that are investable, right? So we live in America. That means we don't do cannabis because I really don't want to be unbanked by my bank. That means that we do C Corps because LLCs are a flow-through tax nightmare for venture funds. And other than that, if I like all the deals they do, then I'm not doing a good job. I want to actively not understand or think, holy shit, that's going to be a bad deal for a relatively large portion of our Scout investments. Of course, I'll never say which ones, but I want to think that because otherwise, I'm too closely involved in the picking and I'm really not. I help make sure that their legal compliance is done, but they're the pickers. For my own personal investments, the direct investments I'm doing, I certainly have a thesis. And I think like most investors, my thesis changes probably every 12 to 24 months as new things happen in the macro environment. And so right now I'm really, really, really focused on marketplaces. I'm focused on next-gen marketplaces. When you think about the fact that the average marketplace throughout a marketplace, right, be it Uber or eBay or Airbnb or, whatever it is, the average age of those three I just mentioned is old enough to have a bar mitzvah, right? And so when that's the age that an ecosystem gets, you have to assume there's going to be some shakeups, and there's going to be, whether it's new technologies, a new generation, whatever it is, there's going to be a change. And so I'm personally really excited about marketplaces.
That's really awesome. What makes for a great investment for you specifically? Not your scouts are all on their own,
Yeah.
but for you, what makes a great investment? I'm curious.
For me, a lot of it is, I think it's kind of like making a souffle, right? Like you can get all the right ingredients in the room, but there has to be a little bit of magic that happens, otherwise it falls.
That's so
And
funny. That's really good.
it's true. I'm really bad at making souffles, but
There's a lot of foods that are literally magic. It's like, how the hell did
yeah.
that happen? I have no idea.
Most baking is actual magic, right? Like you can't just throw it into an instant pot and hope it works. And so to me, a good investment's a little bit like that. I like marketplaces. I like pre-seed. I don't care where startups are based, although I can only wire money into US bank accounts. So they're generally based in the US. But it really comes down to, is it something I'm excited about? Is it something that I am excited to help the founder go from that pre-seed to a proper seed round or Series A? Am I excited about the founder, right? Are the founder and I going to work well together? Am I excited about the industry? I had a phone call a few weeks ago with a founder who I really, really like. And I called her basically in a state of panic because I knew her, but I didn't know what she was working on. She sent me your deck and I was like, I think this is the wrong company. And she's like, what do you mean? And I was like, I think everything that you're doing is right, but you have two other competitors who are really similar to you, who just raised a bunch of money, and the founders are similar to you. And they've taken up a lot of they have a lot of really good investors. And like, I'm very concerned that like, I think you need to go back to the drawing board before you go start raising money. Right. And we'll see what she does. And it's certainly her company, not mine, to decide that with. But to me, what makes a good investment is all the ingredients have to be right at the right time, right? There's a saying in the venture and startup world that if you're too early, you're wrong, right? And if you're too late, you're wrong.
There is the, and I think it's a hard conceit sometimes for founders and venture capitalists to concede this idea that timing is so crucial to the success of any startup. And it's one of those variables that you just can't control. And so you just got to hope. And I like kind of like the metaphor you have here. You kind of just have to hope that all the ingredients are there and the timing and the muse will show up. Is that fair?
Yeah. And I mean, the way I think about everything in relation to my dating life, right? And then like, I know guys who are absolutely wonderful. And if I'd met them before they met their lovely wives, like who knows, right? But you don't say, oh, I'm still going to try that, right? Because that's messy. And it's the same with startups, right? If it's, you have the best idea in the world, but somebody else, just out executed you, or three other companies out executed you. And it's one thing, right? It 5 years ago would have probably been a terrible time to launch an Uber competitor. Right now is actually probably a great time, right? Because Uber's matured so much in the marketplace that there's room for new entrants and maybe they'll buy you. And the people who invested in Uber are now on the other side and they've gotten their money back, right? So to go back to the dating analogy, right? Maybe some guy I met 5 years ago was, in a lovely relationship and now that's over and I run into him again, like, hey, maybe now the time's right, right? So timing matters so much. And I think that in the world of startups, we think so much about hard work and execution and preparation and all the things we can control. And one of the biggest things when you're at the incredibly, incredibly, incredibly early stage is the part that you can't control, which is this the right time, right? You look at pets.com back in the day, that was the wrong time, right? And now things like Chewy go public and they work because a bunch of other things in the macro environment changed, the timing changed, and it was the right time.
Exactly. And they can step on the bones of the deceased and leverage that as well.
Exactly.
Speaking of your dating life, not that I know of anything, but I would assume that you're pretty popular, Sarah. You've had a lot of media surrounding you in the growth and obviously the funding and closing of your fund. From what I've been able to gather, I mean, it's the third largest fund created by an African-American woman, as well as you have some great people on your advisory board, like Melody McCloskey and Molly Chen, right, for Birchbox. Tell me, now that you've kind of you've been running this for a little bit of a while now, what has changed? What are some of the expectations that you had coming into this with all the media attention, with all that? Not to mention probably your dating life has maybe lightened up a little bit. You've had a lot more options maybe, but what expectations have changed, or what have you learned now that you've been in the game a little bit with your own fund?
Fundraising for a fund is a lot harder than fundraising for a company. And running a fund, I would say, is easier than running a company. So don't believe your VCs when they're like, it's so hard. Like it's harder than a random desk job. It is certainly not harder than running a startup, right?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And let's be honest about that. But the fundraising is incredibly hard. I would say, as a rule of thumb, if you're thinking about raising a fund, assume that whatever you want to raise, you're going to have to raise 3 times, right? Meaning that if you want to raise a $25 million fund, go out and get $75 million worth of commitments, like soft yeses, and probably 25 million of those, if you're lucky, will actually end up in the fund. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Your people will say yes, and then they back out because people are weird. People will say yes, and then you realize that they're not an accredited investor, or that you can only take US based money and they're not based in the US, or, you know, they're a fund of funds and then they run out of money and they struggle to raise their money. Or, you know, if the public markets crash and they're a family office and all of a sudden 30-40% of their net worth is wiped out, then, you know, that changes things, right? So there's so many reasons, and it's so incredibly frustrating, but that's probably the biggest thing that I just didn't know, is that when you go out to raise a fund, be prepared to raise it at least twice, if not 3 times.
Did you know that there's even more value than just audio or video? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at VC Hunting, and make sure to sign up for the VC Hunting newsletter, where you'll be able to get weekly news on venture capital, startups, founder stories, and the occasional wisdom extracted from Peter's brain. Go to vchunting.com to sign up. And now back to the episode.
That's awesome. That's great advice. You know, I think I appreciate the conceit, because as a founder, I've on the last 15 years, I've been on the side asking for money. And so I've always found it novel when venture capitalists, because I've been behind closed doors. I'm like, they're always like, it's so hard. I'm like, bro, it's not even close to what it's like to build a company. Come on.
And it's hard in a different way, right? Like my entire life is people who like, you know, favors and interest and favors and interest and finding people money and putting out fires. But it is so much different. I can be anywhere talking to you right now. I happen to be in San Francisco, but I could be, you know, anywhere, right? And that's why your favorite VCs feel like they're always on vacation, because you're kind of like a remote fireman, right? And so like, you don't know when you're going to have an emergency and need your VC. So having them sit inside of an office all day waiting for you to need them isn't particularly helpful. But the flip side is there's a massive difference between all the thinking, reading, and connecting that you do as a VC and all of the just like blunt force trauma you endure as a founder.
I love it. Thank you. And I appreciate that very much. You know, we over here at VC Hunting, we do a little bit of digging, and I want to ask you some questions on a couple of things that you've said in the past. From a Marie Claire article in August of 2019, so not too long ago, August 19, 2019, you said there's a lot of data that shows that when women invest, you make more money. I'm interested. So tell me, what is it, Sarah, that you women have that we don't?
It's actually interesting because there's tons and tons and tons and tons of data that 2 things happen. One, women as investors tend to have better long-term returns. And 2, diverse teams, which mean not a team of all women, right? But a mixed gender team, mixed race teams, diverse teams tend to perform better. And that's outside of even in just investing. That's also in business in general. And the interesting thing is there isn't a definitive causation, right? We know the correlation, and there are a billion separate studies that say this. And, you know, and if you're the kind of person listening going, well, really prove it, like Google it. I don't know. I don't have all the studies at the top of my head, right? But you will find a lot of studies, and then you'll still come on Twitter and yell at me, and that's fine. But, you know, there's a lot of studies.
I'm not trying to get people to yell at you. I'm just asking.
No, it's fine. I love a good Twitter fight, but there's a lot of data that proves this. The thing that's hard to know is why, right? So in investing, the sort of general assumption is that women tend to be a little bit more cautious about investing. And therefore that can drive better returns. I would also argue that some of it is just situational, right? Like I got a sunburn once, and you're like, okay, but I got a sunburn once.
How
And
do you get a sun? I have to work at getting a sunburn, and I'm lighter skinned than you.
No. So this is what happened. So I couldn't figure it out. It was like the middle of winter. I was living in New York. I went down to Miami for the weekend, and I got really sick, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I was like had like cold sweats, and I was throwing up, and it was really bad. And I was freaking out, and I thought I got poisoned. And then one of my friends who's white finally looked at me and was like listening to me. She's like, "You're an idiot. This is a sunburn. You have like a slight sun poisoning. Chill out." But for me, I'd never had a sunburn before. And the only reason I got it is because I was taking allergy pills that makes your skin like hypersensitive to sun. But because it was winter in New York, my allergy doctor didn't tell me to be careful about the sun like he might have if it were the summer. And I didn't know, and I didn't know what a sunburn felt like. And so like, one, woe is me, but two, the point is that until I had that sunburn, like I grew up around people who got sunburns all the time. And to me, it couldn't have hurt that bad because they got them 5 times a summer, right? Something that makes your skin actually feel like it's on fire. Who in the world would have 20 of those over the course of, their youth, right? So to me, and maybe you can relate to that, the idea that a sunburn could feel the way a sunburn feels was unimaginable to me until I had one, right? And the sort of, through line there is when you think about, hey, why do diverse teams drive better returns? Why do women drive better returns? Partially because you just have a bunch of different opinions around the table. Like I would be a terrible person to test sunburn efficacy and to make the deciding vote on a sunburn and seriously on a sunscreen investment, because I've only had one once and I don't really understand the problem. Right. And so you think about all the problems, right, that certain groups of people just fundamentally like aren't really gonna understand. And you start to understand why having a more diverse group of people around the table means you can invest in more diverse problems and solve them better.
I mean, I completely agree with you. There's plenty of literature, research, and education out there that tells us that we can't, and I love the way that you said it, we can't really pinpoint causation, but we can certainly attribute a lot of correlation to the fact that the more diverse teams, let's just stick there for a second, more diverse teams, there's a more of an opportunity to smash different atoms together. You get different ideas, new things emerge, conversations that would have never happened if everyone was exactly the same, and these types of things. So I think anyone out there, but I will say the quote, the stuff that you've been saying is totally memeable. I can't wait for someone to grab a quote of you, Sarah. Say, Sara Kunst, sunburns. Don't get it, white people. Just don't get it. Don't get it.
I really, really don't. So we all can learn from others.
So speaking of which, in terms of being around different people, I found a tweet that really intrigued me, and I'll give you some context. I'm adopted. So I'm an adopted Korean from Korea. And on December 14th, 2019, you said, I'm adopted by white parents. This is your permission slip. Kids in need of homes are better with parents who love them than sans parents. I love that people are more aware of the complexities of race, but don't leave kids who need homes without because they're a different race. So tell me, you're adopted by white parents. How has that experience, and we could probably talk about this till the sun goes down, but I'll give you a easy one here. How has that experience shaped you to be the woman that you are today?
I mean, the real answer is I have no idea, right? Because you can't test your life. And I was adopted when I was 2 weeks old. And so there's no version of me running around who was not adopted or not adopted by my parents, right? So the short answer is I don't know. There's an interesting Tanisha Coates, the author, at the end of Obama's presidency, wrote a series of articles, I think for Time magazine, called "My President Was Black." And there's an interesting sort of interlude in one of those that talks about how there's a theory or an idea that one of the reasons why Obama was the first Black president to be, elected is partially because he's mixed, right? So his and I am as well, but his dad is Black, his mom is white. He was raised primarily by his mom and his mom and then her parents, so his grandparents. And so it gave him a different view of the world because he's certainly Black the same way that I'm Black and you're Asian, and this is who we are. But it's different when you grow up sort of straddling multiple cultures, right? And so you have a different perspective, for better and for worse. It's different than other people. And so I think, and I don't know, again, it's impossible unless we truly are living in the singularity, which we'd have to ask our friend Elon. It's impossible to A/B test and know, right? But I think that it's interesting to think about if we go back to the idea that diversity drives better returns, right? And diversity, again, isn't me having a team of 20 Black women or you having a team of 20 Korean men. It's varying kinds of people. If diverse groups drive better outcomes, then I think it's interesting to say, I would argue that being raised in a family that's inherently diverse, it drives different outcomes, right? And it's not better or worse. And you know, anybody reading this, listening to this, being like, oh, like, should I go and adopt a Benetton ad so that my kids are like extra primed for success? Like, chill out a little bit, Tiger Moms, right? But, you know, I think it's interesting. When you play the hands you're dealt, you kind of say, oh, here's what's in it for me, right? Here are unique viewpoints that I have. Here are things that I see about the world that other people don't. And thinking, and everybody has those, right? I have friends who grew up with two deaf parents, and that's a super different perspective on the world, right? I have friends who grew up in other countries. I have I've all types of things, right? So whatever your sort of differentiator is, I don't think it's inherently good or bad, but I think that it gives you a different viewpoint that fewer people have. And so thinking about how to lean into that and say, cool, I have a different viewpoint. What does that mean? And what can I do with it? I think that's a good thing.
I can appreciate that. I think I will say that your answer is, I can't disagree with your answer because we just don't know until we moved into the singularity, or we're living in the matrix with alternate realities, and we could see what our life trajectory could be if we were set in a different setting. But at the same time, it's fascinating to me that, and then it's not in a good or bad way, that your answer and your response, it doesn't immediately provoke some sort of like, hey, because I was adopted, I'm able to do X, Y, and Z. Rather, you're a lot more plain spoken about the fact that you don't really know. You just kind of take it as you take it. And I'm curious as to whether that was part of your upbringing or part of the way the parents raised you to be, hey, we are just a family. That's it. Diverse is
yeah.
is
I mean, people
put more into it than really matters.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely people's personal experiences. I mean, for me, you know, how much do you remember from 0 to 2 weeks old, right? And you know, your therapist might say some, but for the most part, nobody's going to really argue that you have like a deeply, you know, I remember going to that restaurant at 11 days old, right? So for me, if I'm 33 and I'll be 34 in 2 months, right? How many days is that? I don't have a calculator in front of me. So of all of those days that I've been alive, which 10 years is 3,600 times 3. So that's 10,000. We'll say I've been alive like 11,000 days. Does that sound kind of right? For approximately 12 to 13 of those 11,000 days, I didn't have my parents, right? So as a percentage of time, right, we're at like 0.000.
Sounds like a vacation away from your parents during high school. Did you do a spring break that was longer than that?
Yes, exactly. So, you know, when you think about it that way, you know, and you can say, well, but isn't it so different because they're not biologically related to you? Like, one, as anybody who's done 23andMe and found out bad things about their family can attest to, lots of people have dads that aren't really their dads, right? Or half siblings they never knew about. Or, you know, if you go back to like, there used to be a whole craze, I don't know if it still happens, but like babies used to get switched at birth all the time. That was like a thing in like the 80s.
That was a thing. Yeah.
So if you found out today that the family that you thought was your family the whole time wasn't your family, like, are they not your family? You know? And so to me, the idea of like, oh, like, what about your real parents? I'm like, yes, the people who biologically created me are wonderful, but for the rest of my 99.99999% of my life, I've had other parents and I'm like, you know, I like them too.
They're legit. I'm curious. Were you ever interested in finding your birth parents?
Yeah, I have. I've met my biological mom. I think for most people, I don't know how old you are, but for most younger, it's
I'm closer to
my
40. Say that.
understanding. It's my understanding that most adoptions now, especially within the U.S., aren't closed, and so for the most part, people are meeting their birth parents, and like it's great. It's great, but at the same time, it's different, right, than your actual parents. Like if you're married, you mentioned your wife, you probably love your in-laws dearly, but they're not the same as your parents because they're just not, right? And it's not better or worse. It's just, this is who I spend the most time with and this is who I don't, you know?
And I won't take it much farther than this, but I do have questions about it. Just because I'm a curious cat. Maybe we can talk about it offline. But did you feel like meeting your birth mother created any closure for you? And there's stories about.
I never really felt like I didn't have closure. Like I guess I think of it like my housekeeper was supposed to come today and she's coming on Friday instead. And like the fact that she cleans my house doesn't mean I don't love my house, right? The fact that like your kids are at school with a teacher, like to me, the idea of like, and people have so many feelings on this, but for me, like I have parents and I know they're my parents because legally they're my parents, but two, like they're the people who I spend every day of my life with for, until I went to college. Right. Mm-hmm. And I have other people who, were involved the same way that if you needed a surrogate, your surrogate would be involved. Right. Or if you had a sperm donor, your sperm donor would be involved. I don't think we're in a business, to really tie it back to startups, because I'm a soulless VC, we're in a business of execution, right? Not ideas. And when you think about that as a sort of, as it translates to family making, if you will, the execution is what matters, right? Ideas are a dime a dozen, the execution are what matters. Sperm is actually much less valuable than a dime a dozen, right? So when you think about it, like who's in charge? Is it the person? I'm just saying it's quite affordable.
I love your humor. The dates you go on must be excellent.
I don't know if they'd agree, but I think so. But it's one of those things where it really is a question of like, is it the execution, right? Or is it the idea? And in our market, that if you had started your company with a co-founder who was there the first, 12 days and then wasn't there the next 33 years of building the company, they're not likely to hold much equity, right? Why? Because they don't have much skin in the game. And it's, to me, it's sort of the same. And like to all the people who are adopted, who are listening to this being like, oh my God, I totally disagree. That's great. That's fine too. I don't like, I'm just talking about my life. But for me, that's what it feels like, right? Like there were several amazing co-founders of Sara KUNST, the startup. But most of them left relatively early on. And the ones that stayed with it the whole time, my parents, are the ones who, will get to see most of the upside.
I love it. You are a heartless VC after all. No, just messing. I got one more question before you go. On January 2nd, 2020, so just last month, on a Medium blog post, you said that relationships are what you're personally invested in for the next decade. Technology, you said, quote, technology should enhance, not replace, human connection. I'd love for you to expand on that. For that, a decade's a long period of time. So tell me, what are you going to be focusing on in terms of relationships for Sara, for you, in the next decade? And what does that look like?
I mean, I think it changes, right? So I always like to say that the day before the iPhone came out, which I should really learn the date because I like to quote this, the day before the iPhone came out, no one was an iPhone investor, right? Because it didn't exist. So you could care about, you could have a bunch of ideas, but yes, oh my God, the Sidekick, I loved the Sidekick. I think they brought it back. I'm such a fan.
I love the Sidekick and the BlackBerry Bold 9000. There was just
something about it. Just so good. But so you couldn't be an iPhone investor, right? And what I mean by that is until innovation happens, right? And as VCs, we might see around the corner a little bit, but for the most part, we're chasing innovation. And until the innovation happens, you don't know it's going to happen. And so I can't tell you what my thesis on relationships in 8 years will be. I can tell you for the next 12 to 24 months, it'll be marketplaces, right? And it'll be marketplaces of all kinds. And marketplaces, by definition, are, at the end of the day, two people or two entities. I primarily focus on peer-to-peer marketplaces, exchanging value, right? And how do you build those relationships? And focusing on relationships doesn't mean that there has to be a relationship, right? So the flip side of that would be you look at something like The Real Real, right? eBay is somebody buys something that you put online, you photographed yourself, and then you're messaging with them to answer questions, and then you ship it to them, right? The Real Real is you give it to this intermediary.
Right.
They photograph it. They provide all the information. Somebody buys it from them. You don't even know who ends up, right?
Yep.
So somebody could walk into your house, your friend, wearing something that you used to own, and you wouldn't even know it. And
Yep.
so it's not that relationships have to be, when I say focus on relationships, it's not that that means that for once, I'm not talking about my dating life, right? It doesn't have to be that. It's the idea of, for most of what we do as humans is interacting with other humans, and where do we want to dial that up and have better interaction, and where is it actually better to have less interaction, right? And have more kind of tech enabled. So for me right now, that's marketplaces. And I don't know what it'll be 3 years from now, because if I could tell you the future, I'd go buy lotto tickets, and that'd be a lot more lucrative than this.
Wow. I love it. You are sassy, Sara. You are sassy. Have people told you that?
I've heard that rumor.
You are sassy, and I appreciate it. Sara, thanks so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you the last segment. Where can everyone out there that's listening, we got an international audience, find more about you and your fund?
So 2 places. The website for my fund is cleocap.com. So CLEOCAP.com. And then on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, I'm just Sara KUNST. So SARAHKUNST, and that's my username. I'm not super responsive on LinkedIn, but I'm pretty responsive on Twitter and Instagram.
Awesome. Guys, well, thank you so much again, Sara. For everyone out there that's listening, you can find more information on vchunting.com/Sara KUNST. Sara, thanks again so much for joining the show, and I hope that we can speak again soon.
Cool. Thank you.
True startup story time. Guys, as a founder, I'm often asked, what are my go-to tools and technology that I use as I begin a startup? Well, that's easy. One of them is Dropbox. Dropbox is the easiest way to ensure that all your files and documents are synced on all devices, whether it be mobile, your local desktop, or remote. We want to thank Dropbox for supporting vchunting.com, and make sure to get your 30-day trial free at dropbox.com/business. Wow. Well, wasn't that a fun conversation with Miss Sara KUNST, Managing Director, CLEO Capital? Man, what an awesome spitfire of a lady. I love it. I love her candor. I love her attitude. And we actually talked off screen, off the record, we talked a little bit more about adoption and why adoptees tend to generally just shoot it straight. And the reason is, and I think she gave me a great reason, and this kind of tells me a lot about her personality, is it's because adoptees, people are adopted who have parents that look nothing like them. You can't really hide. And once everyone knows your origin story, you might as well just say it as it is. And I would say that very much her and I share a very similar experience and very similar worldview in that. And you might as well just say it as it is. There's no point in hiding. There's no need to be opaque. Just be transparent and shoot it as it is. Tell us how it is. I love the fact that she was willing to tell us kind of her story and getting into venture capital. And what is intriguing is that she, and I don't know if you guys picked this up, but she gave us great examples of that. You know what? She was, her first company failed. She had an investment. Then she created a sports media company that took 3 years, and that also failed as well. And then she moved into venture capital. And so this isn't a shot against her. I've had things fail before. I think any entrepreneur worth his salt will have things that fail. But what's great about that is there's no shame in it. And that, yeah, so what? Her first startup failed. Second startup, venture capital, 3 years. Sports media company failed. And then they said, hey, look, your startup failed. Why don't you get into venture capital? And lo and behold, now you have the next iteration of Sara KUNST, investor, venture capitalist with what she say 10 female scouts that are looking for great deals, great startups out there. And if you do any Googling, she's one of the powerhouses. She's one of the up and coming powerhouses in venture capital. and female venture capital. So it's really, really exciting to be able to talk with her. I really enjoyed this conversation so much. Again, I just love the candor that she had around her adoption story, as well as the fact that she's just honest about, hey, she doesn't know how it changed her. She doesn't know how it made her different, other than the fact that it is what it is, and she leveraged what she could to her advantage. I think it was fun that conversation that we had around, that if you have female investors, well, you just end up making more money. Well, it's hard to find. It's hard to find causation, but we can certainly find correlation. And this is something that I've read and I've spent time on, because I've had these questions asked of me before, because I often preach, especially to my clients, especially the C-levels and the executives and management, that, hey, having diversity really matters. Having diverse thinking. Let's not focus on anything else other than thinking. Diverse thinking really matters. And we want to focus on that, because the more diverse thinking we have, the more that we can smash atoms together and new ideas can emerge, new conversations, new tension points where we can improve things, more opportunities for questions and emergent ideas, right? And so it's powerful that she's big into that, and she's focusing on scout investing, and she's also focusing on making sure that more people can get that pre-seed money. So if you are in the game, you're in the game, and she's focused on female empowerment, so that's cool. No, not dogging on the males, but if you're female out there and you got some great ideas, you might want to look up Sara KUNST. She might have some money for you guys. I love the fact that she brought up her dating life. So I find that interestingly curious to me. I hope that if there's any namjas out there, any guys out there that are looking for a successful and not hard on the eyes venture capitalist who's got an attitude and a sharp wit and is clearly intelligent, this Sara KUNST might be a great match. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm going into matchmaking here, guys. I just love talking with awesome people. I just love talking with venture capitalists who have great stories that can encourage me as I move into my journey of building my own venture capital fund. And I also like the conceit. I'm glad that I heard it. I've heard it before, but it's just nice to hear it, that she said that, hey, building a company as a founder is significantly harder than managing a venture fund. Completely agree. However, I can see, not that I've done it, I've been on the getting money side of things, that raising a fund might be harder than raising money for a startup, and I can see how that's true. But then again, I wouldn't know, because I've never had that sunburn before. Gotcha, Sara. Gotcha. I appreciate that metaphor very much. I also appreciate her answer to what makes a great investment for you. It's like baking, she said. You got to have all the ingredients, but timing is what really matters. And so there's some things that are outside of your control, and I appreciate that conceit as well. But you know what? If you're a great venture capitalist, what you can do at the best of your ability is make sure all the ingredients and preparation is there, so that timing will hopefully show up. That timing muse that I call it will show up. Preparation, if you're prepared for success, maybe success will happen, guys. Well, I hope you guys thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Sara KUNST. I'm going to stay close to her because I really like her, number one. But number two, she's just really cool. And you know what? Yeah, she's just really cool. So if you want more information in the field notes on our interview, make sure to find your way over to vchunting.com/Sara KUNST. This was a great interview, guys, and I can't wait for the next ones that are coming up. In season 3, we're moving, guys. Moving and shaking. We've done so many so far. Have a great one, and I'll see you next time.